In the wake of the U.S. embassy bombings, bin Laden persisted in intensifying his rhetoric against the United States. His grievances were varied, encompassing U.S. backing of Israel and several regimes that were oppressing Muslims within their territories, particularly Russia's actions in Chechnya, the Philippine government's assaults on the Muslim Moro population in the southern islands, and India's mistreatment of Muslims in the Kashmir region up north. Nonetheless, his primary concern was with the presence of American forces in the Arabian Peninsula and their proximity to Islam's sacred sites, Mecca and Medina. In 1998, al-Qaeda declared that, for 7 years, the United States has been occupying the lands of Islam in the holiest of places. Hence, following the already significant attacks on the U.S. embassies, bin Laden and al-Qaeda focused their sights on an even larger assault, this time targeting American soil. Notably, they resolved to strike the World Trade Center in New York City, which al-Qaeda associates had previously attempted to bomb with a truck in 1993. The second attempt would prove to be much more devastating. Late in 1998 or early 1999, bin Laden authorized the World Trade Center initiative. The rest of 1999 was spent screening potential candidates to execute the attacks in Afghanistan. A requirement for the leaders was that they needed to be proficient in English and have experience living in Western society for a period. Several individuals, including Muhammad Atta, Marwan al-Shehi, and Ziad Jarrah, were quickly chosen. Another individual, Hani Hanjour, was selected once it became apparent that he held a commercial pilot's license and was an accomplished airplane pilot. By 2000, 19 individuals had been chosen and were being organized into terrorist cells in the United States, operating in Arizona, Florida, and California. Final targets were identified in early 2001, with the plan being to hijack multiple commercial airline planes and crash them into buildings in suicide terrorist attacks. The Twin Towers, the two main structures of the World Trade Center, were the primary targets, while the Pentagon in Virginia was also a target. Additionally, there were believed to be plans to crash a fourth plane into the U.S. Capitol building, the government's seat in Washington, D.C. With the plan set and terrorist cells positioned in the U.S. to execute it, a date was established for the coordinated attacks. The day selected was September 11, 2001. On the morning of September 11, 2001, the 19 hijackers, functioning in independent cells, began to carry out their orders. 5 hijackers boarded American Airlines Flight 11, which was set to depart from Logan International Airport in Boston at 7:59 a.m., headed for Los Angeles International Airport. 5 others boarded United Airlines Flight 175, which was making the same journey from Logan to Los Angeles. That plane took off from the Boston runway 15 minutes after American Airlines Flight 11. Meanwhile, 6 minutes later, at 8:20 a.m., American Airlines Flight 77 took off from Washington Dulles International Airport in Virginia, not far from Washington, D.C. 5 hijackers were also aboard. Finally, 22 minutes later, at 8:42 a.m., a fourth plane, United Airlines Flight 93, departed from Newark International Airport in New Jersey and headed for San Francisco. There were just 4 hijackers on this flight. What followed was a day of infamy. Within minutes of becoming airborne, the hijackers on all 4 planes began their attempts to seize control of the aircraft. Consequently, at 8:46 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11 crashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center, traveling at a speed of approximately 750 kilometers per hour. While people throughout Manhattan speculated if this could have been an accident, United Airlines Flight 175 was altering its course in the skies. At 9:03 a.m., 17 minutes after the first plane had struck the North Tower, it collided with the South Tower at a speed of 800 kilometers per hour. Just over half an hour later, American Airlines Flight 77 crashed into the west wall of the Pentagon in Virginia. Only United Airlines Flight 93 missed its intended target as it went down in a field in Pennsylvania, while the passengers were trying to regain control from the hijackers. The plane crashes were merely the beginning of the devastation. When the planes impacted the Twin Towers, well over 10,000 people were already inside, commencing their day's work. With the elevators rendered inoperable due to the damage from the initial impact and fires wreaking havoc on the upper floors, evacuation efforts could only proceed at a moderate pace as individuals had to navigate down dozens of staircases. The upper stories where the planes had struck were transformed into an inferno, and within moments, many of those who were still alive were leaping to their deaths. The South Tower, which had been hit second, collapsed at 9:59 a.m. It was followed 29 minutes later by the North Tower. In total, it is believed that 2,606 people lost their lives in the towers and on the ground, along with 147 passengers and crew aboard the two planes. The damage at the Pentagon was less severe, but even here, 125 lost their lives on the ground, along with 59 crew and passengers. All 40 crew and passengers on United Airlines Flight 93 perished. The September 11, 2001 attacks were thus the most catastrophic terrorist attacks in world history. Furthermore, since media outlets started covering the story within minutes globally, and footage of the planes hitting the towers was soon accessible, the psychological impact of the attacks was unmatched as an act of terrorism. Initially, bin Laden denied having any involvement in orchestrating the 9/11 attacks on the United States. On the 16th of September, he issued a statement that was subsequently aired by Al Jazeera, in which he denied responsibility. Reports in the second half of the 2000s at times indicated that he might have crossed the western border into Iran, but these claims were likely unfounded, and the truth is that bin Laden and al-Qaeda managed to reside in Pakistan, mostly untroubled and somewhat comfortably for years, benefiting from the tacit backing of influential factions within Pakistan's political and security apparatus. During this period, bin Laden and al-Qaeda persistently orchestrated terrorist operations throughout the broader Muslim world. Attacks targeting the United States became significantly more challenging in the wake of 9/11 due to an extensive security system established at American airports and various other sites. Nevertheless, there was no lack of Western targets now accessible in the Middle East. Initially, Afghanistan had been occupied by American, British, and other Allied forces in late 2001, and they were set to remain there in some capacity for the following 2 decades. However, a more pronounced Western presence would soon be observed in Iraq. After the early triumph over the Taliban in Afghanistan, the administration under President George W. Bush in the U.S. made it clear that it planned to pursue more regime changes in the Middle East, aiming at nations considered to be supporters of terrorism. The regime of Saddam Hussein in Iraq, which had managed to retain power following the Gulf War, was a significant focus. This strategy would not receive as much backing from America's allies as the invasion of Afghanistan did, with nations like France contending that the Bush administration was now exploiting the 9/11 attacks as a cover for regime changes in oil-rich nations and a kind of U.S. neo-imperialism in the region. Despite these concerns, the U.S. and Britain, along with several other smaller allied countries, invaded Iraq in March 2003, asserting that Hussein's regime was attempting to acquire weapons of mass destruction and had connections to bin Laden. Bin Laden had frequently pointed to the harsh economic sanctions that the U.S. had placed on Iraq after the Gulf War as one of his grievances against America, but there is no substantial evidence indicating that the Hussein regime ever materially supported bin Laden in any significant way. The invasion unfolded much like it had in Afghanistan. A quick victory was secured over the Ba'athist regime of Saddam Hussein, and within 2 months, President Bush declared U.S. victory in the conflict. However, things were not so straightforward, and similar to Afghanistan, a brutal counterinsurgency campaign commenced in the summer of 2003, extending for years as various factions within Iraq sought to expel U.S. forces from the nation. Bin Laden and al-Qaeda played roles in this internal conflict. Their strategies were aimed at creating divisions between the Sunni Muslim minority and the Shiite Muslim majority in an attempt to incite a civil war across Iraq. Conventional terrorist tactics were utilized, such as the bombing of the Al-Askari shrine in the city of Samarra on the 22nd of February 2006. Although this event did not lead to a large-scale loss of life, it did involve the devastation of one of the most sacred sites in Iraq for Shiite Muslims, and ignited several days of sectarian violence in Baghdad and other areas where at least 1,000 individuals perished. Ultimately, by the late 2000s, the conflict in Iraq started to stabilize as a notable American troop increase in 2007, coupled with political reforms, helped to reduce the most severe violence. Yet, al-Qaeda persisted in their efforts, and from Pakistan, bin Laden approved bombings in Baghdad and a suicide attack on the Shiite Imam Hussein Shrine in Karbala in March 2008 that resulted in 42 fatalities and injured many more. Meanwhile, in Pakistan, bin Laden had relocated to a newly constructed compound in Abbottabad in northern Pakistan. Construction on this facility seemingly commenced shortly after bin Laden arrived in the country at the start of 2002 and was finished in 2005. The compound occupied a 38,000 square foot estate enclosed by a concrete perimeter wall rising to 5.5 meters high and armed with barbed wire on top. There were minimal windows in the compound, with numerous screens installed to obstruct views of the inside, including a privacy screen on a third-floor balcony that was sufficiently tall to afford bin Laden, who stood 6 feet 4 inches tall, privacy. It is hard to accept that the authorities could not have noticed how extraordinary the new property was, as it was designed with security as a priority. Bin Laden likely resided there from 2006 onward with some of his wives, children, and followers in a city not far from the capital of Pakistan, Islamabad. While bin Laden's compound provided him shelter in Pakistan for numerous years, ultimately, his excessive dependence on it would lead to his downfall. In 2009, U.S. intelligence agencies concluded that Abu Ahmed al-Kuwaiti, a close associate of bin Laden's, believed to have been at the Battle of Tora Bora in December 2001, when the terrorist leader narrowly escaped capture by the U.S., had begun serving as a reliable courier and messenger for him during his time in hiding in Pakistan. In 2009, the CIA confirmed that al-Kuwaiti was residing in Abbottabad. Further intelligence efforts allowed them to recognize the bin Laden compound as an unusual building in the city. The U.S. Congress provided tens of millions of dollars to facilitate the formation of a CIA team in Abbottabad, which began monitoring the compound and its visitors in 2010. Despite this comprehensive operation and the deployment of the most advanced drone and surveillance technology accessible globally, the team was never successful in acquiring a photograph or any concrete evidence that definitively proved bin Laden was living within the compound. But by early 2011, the volume of circumstantial evidence was such that they were certain this was the hideout of the mastermind behind the 9/11 attacks. U.S. President Barack Obama authorized what was known as Operation Neptune Spear on May 1, 2011. It was lunchtime in Washington, D.C., but only 30 minutes later, at nearly 11 p.m. in Afghanistan, 2 Black Hawk helicopters carrying 24 Navy SEALs departed from an American airbase in Afghanistan and flew across the border into Pakistan. Just over an hour and a half later, at what was midnight in Pakistan on May 2nd, the helicopters touched down in the compound at Abbottabad. One of the helicopters malfunctioned during the landing, but none of the Navy SEALs sustained injuries. Combat began as soon as they arrived, with a brief firefight against some of bin Laden's followers. Afterwards, the Navy SEALs advanced into the main compound. Back in Washington, D.C., President Obama and senior government and defense officials observed live footage of the raid from the Situation Room in the White House. On the second floor, the Navy SEALs confronted and shot one of bin Laden's many adult sons, as well as another follower, Abu Ahmed al-Kuwaiti, whose presence in Abbottabad initially indicated to the security services that bin Laden might be hiding in the city. Then, as they ascended the stairs again, they discovered bin Laden on the 3rd floor. Their orders were to kill rather than capture the al-Qaeda leader. There are differing accounts about what then happened, as various Navy SEALs have attempted to claim credit for killing bin Laden, but it appears most likely that it was Matt Bissonnette who shot bin Laden at 39 minutes past midnight local time, in the body and head at the doorway of his bedroom, causing him to stagger backward into the room and collapse to the floor, lifeless. Bin Laden was found to have 500 euros and 2 mobile phones sewn into his robes, undoubtedly for use if he found himself escaping an attack on the compound, like the one that resulted in his death. It was a rather ignoble end. A decision had been made in advance that Bin Laden's body would be disposed of swiftly in a location where his resting place would never be discovered and turned into a shrine for Islamic fundamentalists and jihadists. Therefore, shortly after he was killed and the compound was completely secured, the Navy SEALs placed the al-Qaeda leader's body in a body bag and then transported it to the helicopter that remained intact. After conducting a sweep of the compound to collect any intelligence that might help prevent further terrorist attacks or establish a clearer understanding of what bin Laden had been doing over the years, the team departed the compound with the body on the only operational helicopter. A backup helicopter was summoned to retrieve some of the remaining Navy SEALs. By 8 p.m. back in Washington, it was confirmed that the body was that of bin Laden. A few hours later, President Obama spoke to the nation to announce the success of the raid. While he was doing so, bin Laden's body was being transported to an undisclosed location at sea for disposal, weighed down with iron chains and rocks to ensure it sank to the seafloor. This was accomplished within 24 hours of his death to adhere to Islamic tradition. Unfortunately, the demise of Osama bin Laden did not result in any decrease in the threat posed by Islamic fundamentalists and jihadists to the Western world, or even to most Muslims within the Islamic world. As ruthless as their methods were, al-Qaeda was already being overshadowed by more extreme jihadi factions by the time of bin Laden's death. In 2004, a Jordanian jihadist by the name of Abu Musab al-Zarqawi became affiliated with al-Qaeda in Iraq during the early phases of the counterinsurgency against the U.S. occupation. In 2006, al-Zarqawi and several of his closest associates combined forces to establish what they called the Islamic State of Iraq. In the subsequent years, they grew increasingly powerful, yet their tactics also escalated in brutality, employing vicious methods against Muslims who would not conform to anything other than the strictest interpretations of Sharia law. By the time U.S. forces withdrew from Iraq in the early 2010s, al-Qaeda was becoming less tolerant of this style of jihad in the Middle East, leading to a complete split between the two organizations in the years following bin Laden's death under al-Qaeda's new leadership. Ayman al-Zawahiri. Remarkably, by the 2010s, al-Qaeda, the organization responsible for the 9/11 attacks, was perceived as too moderate by many Islamic fundamentalists, while the Islamic State of Iraq group was gaining significantly more followers among aspirant jihadists. In the years that ensued, the Islamic State of Iraq made a significant impact on the global stage. Following the Arab Spring of 2011, a brutal civil war broke out in Syria, and the U.S. withdrawal from neighboring Iraq led to considerable portions of the country falling out of the Baghdad government's control. In the years that ensued, the Islamic State of Iraq made a significant impact on the global stage. Following the Arab Spring of 2011, a brutal civil war broke out in Syria, and the U.S. withdrawal from neighboring Iraq led to considerable portions of the country falling out of the Baghdad government's control. In this context, the Islamic State, under its new leader, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, was able to begin exerting direct control over a vast expanse of territory across northern Iraq and eastern Syria. Throughout 2014 and 2015, the newly named Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant, or ISIL, gained international notoriety as it declared the establishment of an Islamic caliphate over the lands it had seized. ISIL escalated Islamic jihad to a new level of savagery that even al-Qaeda distanced itself from. Gradually, control over eastern Syria and northern Iraq was wrested from ISIL between 2014 and 2017 as the U.S. redeployed troops to the region. As of the early 2020s, Islamic fundamentalism appears to be in decline, influenced in part by rapidly improving living conditions in the Middle East, a diminished desire for nation-building by the United States in the area, and a warming of relations between Israel and numerous Muslim neighbors. Thus, the narrative of Osama bin Laden reaches its conclusion, but its reverberations continue to influence the world we inhabit. To some, He represented a freedom fighter, opposing what he perceived as oppression. To others, he epitomized terror, accountable for some of the most catastrophic attacks in contemporary history. Regardless of viewpoint, his actions left an imprint that no one could overlook. The emergence of bin Laden signified a pivotal moment in international politics. He confronted the most dominant nations, redefined warfare's nature, and compelled the world to face new types of conflict, where the adversary lacked borders, uniforms, and fear of mortality. His demise in 2011 might have closed a chapter, but it did not conclude the narrative. The ideologies he endorsed, the wars he impacted, and the lives he unsettled continue to resonate throughout the Middle East and beyond. As we reflect on his life, we confront challenging inquiries. How did one individual come to wield such influence? What motivated him to take the course he took? And most crucially, what insights can we gain from his rise and decline? I hope you found this video helpful and inspiring. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more content like this. Share your thoughts in the comments below and let me know what topics you'd like to see next. Thank you for watching.